and Barnacles Patreon edition, where we're going to discuss a book tangentially related to Ulysses today. We're assuming if you're here on Patreon, you know who we are and what our deal is and what we do. So just let me say hi.
This is like sort of a Kelly episode, really. Like, you've read this book, I haven't, and hopefully I'll have something to say, but who knows?
Yeah, welcome to our on-again, off-again series of authors who were inspired by Ulysses, shall we say. And we are covering today a book, which I have right here, called Nightwood by author Djuna Barnes. This book is a book I've wanted to read for a very long time. I already once picked it up and not finished it. I bought this at Shakespeare and Company the last time I was in Paris, which is almost 10 years ago now. It was very much recommended to me by a good friend of mine, just gushed over this book. The only thing I knew about it is that it's about lesbians, and I read the first 1.5 chapters and there were no female characters in it, and I kind of stopped reading it. So, when do they get to the fireworks factory? They get to the fireworks factory, and we will today as well. It is about 150 pages, so you might be thinking, I can knock this episode out in a couple of weeks. I don't want to say it's difficult because it's not the right word. It is complex despite its length. There are 2 forewords in this book, one by Jeanette Winterson, one by T.S. Eliot, and they both say it took them multiple times to get into it, and that you can't really understand it in a single reading, which I've read it once. I think that puts it in the same club as Ulysses. I'm going to do my best with this. I really want to do this book justice because I think it's a very good book. And I do think you should read it. I don't think anyone who not only read and enjoys Ulysses, but follows a Ulysses podcast enough to pay for the Patreon of the Ulysses podcast will be frightened away by that description. But I did find it very challenging. And there were definitely pages where I was reading it and just thinking, what is happening in this book?
And is it because of the language, or is it because
it's
like Ulysses?
But it's not like Ulysses, because Ulysses is at times purposely inscrutable. There's just a depth to the symbolism and metaphor in it. It's deceptively simple. I'm going to give a plot synopsis of it. So I will say, if you haven't read Nightwood and you want to read it completely fresh, we have to talk about the book in order to have an episode, so you might pause and come back. It's hard to say why it's hard, but we'll talk about it. But it is quite challenging.
I just scrubbed through it like randomly, like it looks like it's written in, like, if you hit like any random page in Ulysses, you'd know, oh God, what's going on here? But just as a superficial pass, it looks like a conventional novel. There's paragraphs, punctuation.
Yes.
Prose.
She uses normal words. It's not like Oxen of the Sun or Ithaca or something like that. But it's more in the way it's arranged, and it's. I do think if I read it again, it would be a completely different experience. So
let me just read a random bit. After a long silence in which the doctor had ordered and consumed the Chambéry phrase and the Baron a coffee, the doctor remarked that the Jew and the Irish, the one moving upward and the other down, often meet spade to spade in the same acre.
Yeah, so you can see it does have some things in common with Ulysses.
Yeah. The Irish may be as common as whale shit, excuse me, on the bottom of the ocean, forgive me, but they do have imagination and, he added, creative misery, which comes from being smacked down by the devil and lifted up again by the angels. Misericordioso. Save me, Mother Mary, and never mind the other fellow. But the Jew, what is he at his best? Never anything higher than a meddler. Pardon my wet glove. A supreme and marvellous meddler often, but a meddler nevertheless. He bowed slightly from the hips. All right, Jews meddle and we lie. That's the difference, the fine difference. I'll leave it there. Yep. But you get the idea, like it's the same kind of like citizen kind of bigotry, and there's an O'Connor, okay.
Yeah, one of the characters is Matthew O'Connor. Okay, so,
all right.
Yeah. That was him you're reading from. That's very much his style. But it will go on like that, and it's kind of like in short. It's like Ulysses in that you can read it in short bursts, and you kind of go okay, and then you're 3 pages in and you're like, I don't know what's happening anymore. Okay. But definitely reading a lot of scholarship on it in preparation for this has helped. But even going back through some of my notes, I'm like, I'm a little out of my depth. I feel out of my depth. I don't want to say I am out of my depth, but yeah, this was a challenging one, but it's very rewarding. And I spoke to my friend, and he was really stoked that I had read the book, and he's like, my favorite part is this, and I didn't want to say, I don't remember that part at all. But I'm glad that I read it. Djuna Barnes is a really fascinating person in her own right. This is her best known work by far. I think if you like Ulysses, you really get something out of this, but it's a very different book than Ulysses. But yeah, one of the main characters is Irish, but he's sort of like Irish by way of San Francisco. The way his character is constructed, I don't know if he's Irish American or if he's from Ireland. There's a lot about him that's probably not true, but he's identified as Irish, so there's an Irish person in it. And yes, he's talking about the difference between the Irish and the Jews. He's speaking to Felix, who's a Jewish character, so that relationship is explored a bit, much more in-depth in Ulysses maybe than this, but there are other relationships in this. It's a very emotionally intense and fraught book. I think like going back into it is also just to be like in this royal of emotions, just intense in a way that I've never felt that like emotional intensity out of Ulysses. I'm worried it's going to be hard to talk about because there's just a lot to it. I guess we should start at the beginning. Who was Djuna Barnes? Djuna Barnes was an American fiction writer and artist who did most of her best-known work in the 1920s. She kind of gets put in with the like lost generation of expat writers in Paris. She didn't live in Paris all that long. She spent most of her life in New York. She's born in upstate New York and lived most of her life in Greenwich Village. So I would say she's kind of remembered as like an American expat writer, but she really, I would say, is probably better characterized as a New York-based writer. She's often classified as a modernist because of her experimental prose style, her use of metaphorical and symbolic language, and for her depictions of lesbian relationships. So you can see how her writing has a lot in common with Ulysses, but it's still a very different book. And I know at least one source I read, I can't remember which, but said that this is a pretty big stylistic departure for her. I haven't read her two earlier novels, but that she was very much inspired by Ulysses to do something more experimental, more
modernist.
Yeah, modernist, I guess. But modernism is a label that's applied to her after the fact. I think in the 1960s is really when that came back around. She, like a lot of modernist writers as well, uses her own life experiences to inform her writing. So most of the characters in this book, like in Ulysses, are based on people that she knew. One of the main characters is based on herself. So we'll kind of go through who the people were. I think she hung out in a lot of bohemian and artistic circles. So a lot of it is just people she knew from New York and Paris who were very eccentric and interesting, and so she wrote them into her book. And this book describes specifically the area of Paris around the Jacob Hotel, because that is where she lived in Paris when she was there from 1920 to 1921. These are also the years in which the novel is set. So the novel is published much later, but it's set in the early 1920s. So when the book was published, it was already describing a world that had kind of gone away. Her childhood is really unconventional, so I will remark on it. I think that her childhood definitely influences some of things in the book, especially in the characters, like unconscious minds. She grew up on a farm in upstate New York near Cornwall and Hudson. Her father was named Wald Barnes and her grandmother was Zadel Barnes Gustafson, and they were very unusual people. They were creative people for sure. Her grandmother, who was a huge influence in her life, much I think more so than her mother, was a writer as well. But really what sets them apart is in the 1880s, 1890s, they kind of set about building their little bubble on this farm in upstate New York. I'm struggling not to call it a commune because I don't think that's the right word, because they didn't bring in a lot of outside people, but they created this very like little micro community of their family based around the principle of free love. Reading it and putting my own gloss on it from 2025, I think that her father would now be called like polyamorous, where he had multiple partners. I think I jokingly called it a polycule to you,
Yeah.
but it's not quite right. He was married to Djuna's mother, and then he had a second partner that is, some people call her a common law wife, so like, which just meant they lived together, but they weren't legally married, because bigamy, being married to two people, was illegal. But functionally, he had two wives, and then lots of kids, so Djuna would have been among them. They were very self-contained. I know that she never went to school. She said that she was never formally educated, that was something really her parents held her back from, and there was some homeschooling, but much more so they were focused on running this farm. It was a very like hands-on farming experience for the kids. There's a biography of her written in the 90s. I would have liked to read more of that. So I think it was not a great environment to grow up in. I think I've definitely seen some abuse allegations. And one author in particular who I read, Bonnie Kimes Scott, kind of obliquely described some sexual abuse that went on. The way she puts it in this article, it says, Barnes seems to have been sexually initiated as a small child by her grandmother and was forced as a teen into an alliance with the brother of her father's second common-law wife, a man her father's age. So there's a lot unsaid there. I don't know what sexually initiated specifically means. Yeah. I don't know what an alliance means, but I would think that she was expected to do things with adults against her will when she's very young.
There was a big eruption of that in Germany with some of the free love 70s groups where rampant child abuse.
Yeah.
So it can come hand in. Not saying all people who are into this lifestyle are doing that.
Yeah.
But you got to have major health warnings and breaks if someone's going to play that game, because this can go downhill real quick.
Yeah, that's kind of where she grew up. There's imagery in the book of Nora, who's one of the main characters, being visited by her grandmother in her dreams and a violent father and things like that. They aren't major scenes or anything in the book, but they are more in an unconscious or dreamlike sense. Barnes wrote two other novels prior to Nightwood, Lady's Almanac and Rider is much more based on her childhood experiences. I have not read it, but that's my understanding of it. Lady's Almanac especially is sort of a satire of, I guess, lesbian culture in the 1920s. So that's a pretty persistent theme throughout her work.